This is California Edition. My name is Brad Pomerance. We thank you for joining us. Over this half hour, we'll be speaking with three educators in San Luis Obispo County. We will start with Julian Crocker. He is the superintendent for public instruction in the county. We will also be joined by Chris Ungar and Mark Buchman. Both are members of San Luis Coastal Unified School District. But first, we start with Dr. Julian Crocker. Thank you so much for joining us, sir.
Thank you, Brad.
I want to speak with you about the state of education in San Luis Obispo County as an example of what it's like in the other 58 counties, because I do believe that this county is somewhat of a microcosm. It has some wealthy areas, it has some challenged areas. Give us a sense of how education looks in 2012 versus 2007, let's say.
Sure. Some of the things are the same, actually. If you look at just student achievement, our average student achievement scores look very good. We exceed the state averages, and we have some very high-performing schools. So on an average score, our students have basically progressed over the last 3 or 4 years. What's still there is the achievement gap, and that is clearly our most pressing challenge.
And when you say achievement gap, you mean the gap between those students from more well-heeled communities and those that are from more disadvantaged communities?
Not as much as that's a piece of it. It is also our English language learners. So it's the difference between the average student score, and then when you break out the data and look at various groups of students, it's students who are in poverty, and that's generally families $40,000 or less for a family of 4, or our English language learners. Those are the two groups.
At the same time, the funding that some would argue is needed to close that achievement gap is drying up and continues to dry up. Right. Talk to us about the fiscal picture for this county as an example of the 58 counties in our state.
I think our revenue limit districts are very similar. Countywide, over the last 5 years, we've probably lost about $40 to almost $50 million
and when you say
revenue
limit districts, those are districts that receive money from the state.
Right.
Those are not districts that are known as basic aid districts,
correct,
which receive money as through property taxes.
That's right.
And that's when you reach a certain threshold.
That's correct. That's correct. We have three of our 10 districts are basic aid districts, and they are more reliant on their local property tax. And the difference is that even in bad real estate times, generally property taxes have continued to go up. So districts and basic aid districts have had a more stable source of revenue.
And when you look at this county, unlike counties in the Inland Empire or in the Stockton region, we have not seen values plummet as dramatically.
Correct, because this is a coastal county.
And so things are a bit better.
Right.
But what you are saying is this county has lost $50 million in 5 years.
Right.
That equates to a loss, as I understand it, of $17,000 per classroom.
That's right.
So it somewhat begs the question, if you've lost all this money and yet scores are stable to up, who cares if you lost the money?
Yeah, and the issue is what I said, the achievement gaps. Those are the students that are not benefiting and that in fact are greatly hindered and hurt tremendously by this loss of revenue, because we've narrowed our focus only on those things that are measured, which are basically English language arts, skills, and mathematics, and those are important. But what we haven't been able to do because of the loss of resources is help students who are below the average to achieve in those areas, not to mention the reduction in other things, including science, frankly, as well as art, music, and those other skills that you and I both know are necessary for a successful adult.
The recent budget that passed in June did not cut any money for education, from education, I should say. And the reason that occurred is because Governor Brown has put an initiative on the ballot. It's called Proposition 30, and he is banking on this initiative passing. This initiative increases sales tax by 1/4 cent for 4 years, income tax on the wealthy for 7 years. Right. I understand that you personally have taken a position on Proposition 30. What is your position on this initiative?
I'm very much in favor of this and feel as though it is by far the best solution that we have before it. There's no great solution. Everything is pretty ugly in many ways, and I'm for it for a couple of reasons. Primarily because it does address the structural deficit in the state budget. And I think it's very important to understand that with 40% of the state budget going to public education, we are all...
By statute, I think it's constitutional amendment, Prop 98.
Correct. And by that, any movement in the state budget impacts schools. So regardless of what we do in the short term for schools, unless we correct the issues at the state level, it's going to hurt schools. So I'm
Later on in this episode, we'll be speaking with Mark Buchman, who is the president of the San Luis Obispo PTA.
Right.
That organization has taken a very strong position in favor of Prop 38, which is a competing initiative that would increase income tax from 0.4% to 2.2%, and all of that money would flow to education. I understand their position is that Prop 38 is much more dedicated to education. It's put it in a lockbox, if I can use that term. But there are many educators, including yourself, that are not supporting Prop 38. Why do you prefer Prop 30?
Well, for two reasons. Number one is there are a lot of strings with Prop 38, and it looks a lot to me like another categorical program. And in Education Ease, that means a program that does have a lot of requirements and not a lot of flexibility. I personally am in favor of local boards having a lot of flexibility to work with, so that's a concern I have with Prop 38. The other issue relates to what I'd said earlier, which is since it does not address directly the state deficit issue, if the state economy continues to be bad, then we may gain from Prop 38, but unless our state budget is addressed, then we'll lose on the other hand. So we really don't come out any better.
Although San Luis Obispo County is a medium-sized county, when you look at the other counties, I think it's fair to say that in a lot of ways it's a bellwether county. It is a county that has plenty of left-of-center voters, plenty right-of-center voters. In my estimation, if Prop 30 passes in this county, that's the governor's initiative, it means Prop 30 passed statewide. That doesn't mean if it doesn't pass in this county, it won't pass, but if I look at San Luis Obispo County and see Prop 30, yes, it's going to pass statewide. What are you hearing as a result on the street?
Yeah, I think the same thing. I think generally we have a very supportive community within San Luis Obispo County in terms of our public schools. And I think parents particularly are generally pleased with the public schools. The problem, I think, and we always have that, not just here but in any county, there's a relatively small number of voters who actually are parents at any given time.
Right.
Probably no more than 10%. So you're working with 10% of the population who have a direct interest in public schools, trying to convince at least another 40 or 50%.
What I'm wondering is, will people like yourself be out there pounding the pavement, and I'm not taking a position, I'm just asking, in favor of Prop 30? Because look, you are the highest elected official in this county in terms of education. If you're saying yes on Prop 30, no on Prop 38, be that as it may, that could hold sway.
I certainly am. I have to be very careful, as all elected officials do, not to use public funds in this way. So I'm very clear about that very bright line. But not crossing that line, I absolutely will be campaigning very strongly for the passage of Prop 30.
If Prop 30 does not pass, what we know, or what we are told, is there will be an immediate trigger cut of about $6 billion to education. The school year could be cut by up to 3 weeks. In 2 districts in this county already, we have seen dramatic cuts in school day. A number of school days. Paso, I think Shandon as well has had.
San Miguel.
Yeah, San Miguel has had cuts. What will that mean? What will that look like?
Yeah, it will be very devastating because we'll lose probably up to around 15 to 16 million more dollars in addition to the 40 or 50 that we've already lost. So the only way to make those kinds of adjustments are things like reducing the school year or the school day, more layoffs, increasing class sizes, all the bad things. It's the only way you can cope.
So let's look at Paso, for example. You had been superintendent there. I think it's fair to say that that area is more of a right-of-center area. What are they saying about Prop 30? Because, I mean, one could argue that it's really in their best interest to see Prop 30 pass.
Absolutely, and I think there's support for Proposition 30 in Paso and in the North County. I think generally we've had good support throughout the county, as you said. But again, this is not the best economic times. I think there's this general anti-tax feeling. So it's really incumbent upon us that are in favor of this to make the case of why this is necessary, of both the investment in public education and not so much of what's happened because we haven't had the money, but what we need and want to do if we had additional resources.
Okay, Julian Crocker, we thank you for joining us. When we come back, we'll be speaking with Mark Buchman. He is president of the PTA for San Luis Obispo County. I'm Brad Pomerance. We'll be right back. Welcome back to California Edition. My name is Brad Pomerance. Our guest, Mark Buchman, he is a board member of the San Luis Coastal Unified School District. He is also the president of the PTA in San Luis Obispo County, and he is here today as a representative of that organization. I thank you, sir, for joining us again. And I want to speak with you about two initiatives that will be on the ballot this fall. Proposition 30 is the initiative supported by Governor Brown, increases sales tax by a quarter cent for 4 years, increases income tax on the wealthy for 7 years, and then Prop 38, which has been endorsed by the PTA, the organization in which you are representing. It is supported by a woman named Molly Munger. She's put her heart and soul into it, her dollars. Give us some background on what Prop 38 would do.
Prop 38 is the only proposition that's on there that takes dollars and puts them directly into the local community. Do not stop at Sacramento, do not stop at the governor's office, and do not stop at the legislature. Nobody can mess with that money. And the only thing that can happen at the local level is that there have to be public hearings. The community helps decide how that money gets spent.
And as I understand it, under Prop 38, it would raise $11 billion. Is it a year? Is that right?
The first few years is going to be $10 to $11 billion, and then as the school debt's paid down, probably go up.
And it will go down?
It will go down just slightly.
And the way it does that is it increases income taxes from 0.4% to 2.2% over 12 years. It's a sliding scale.
It's a sliding scale. At the lowest levels, there'll be no increase. In the mid-range, where most of us are, every increase will be less than 2%. So if we figure $1, it's 2 cents on $1.
Now, that's still an increase. And I think it's fair to say, and this applies to both initiatives, you know, these are difficult times. The state has not passed a statewide tax initiative on itself since 2004. You remember, sir, we had this initiative on the ballot in June that dealt with cigarette taxes. Mind you, we're not Kentucky, we're not North Carolina, we don't love our tobacco like they do in those states. And that initiative to tax cigarettes went down. Do you think voters are ready to pass an initiative that would increase their taxes, be it Prop 30 or Prop 38?
Let me do two parts, because you raised two issues.
Sure.
One, the California State PA does have a sliding scale on taxes. The proposition that are being supported by the governor and the legislature in Sacramento is not a sliding scale. So if I have to buy clothes for my family,
the sales tax is on everyone.
I have to pay the same amount as somebody that's making $200,000. If I want to buy a car, I'm paying the same amount. It's a very regressive, very mean tax.
Well, regressive as it relates to sales tax, it spreads the pain completely, if that's what you want to call it. But the income tax side, that is more progressive, because it only taxes the wealthy.
Right, and in terms of the PTA, it's a very sliding scale. So the people that are making the most money, who can afford it the most, they're the ones that pay.
But let's talk about the mood of the electorate.
Sure.
I mean, you know, California in a lot of ways, look, it's a pretty darn blue state when it comes to social issues, when it comes to presidential elections. When it comes to fiscal matters, I don't know if I'd call it so blue. I mean, we didn't pass a cigarette tax.
Yeah. Cigarette tax, I think, was an anomaly. This state has supported public education like no other state. Back in the 60s, we spent more than 20% more than any other state in the United States. We had the best schools. We had people coming from all over the world to look at our schools. And we taxed, my parents and grandparents taxed themselves in order to support the future of California.
Look what happened in 1978. The voters passed Prop 13, and that completely changed the way that Californians tax themselves and the way public services are funded, including education. And look, I was in public school in 1978, and literally I could tell from that day that things were different.
Right.
And things have been different. And if you look at California's commitment to education since 1978, maybe a lot of lip service, but we are spending more in prisons today than we are in education.
We definitely are spending more on prisons than we are in education. And when you look at the prison population and the percentage of the prison population that are dropouts, that's why we have that many prisons. But we can forestall that if we would just invest in the future of California. And to do that, we have to increase the money that we put in public schools. We wouldn't do this to in our own families, we wouldn't do this.
But let's talk about Prop 30 versus Prop 38. The governor's proposition does dedicate a significant sum of money to education, not as much as Prop 38, which is 100% dedicated. But Prop 30 is more broad-based. It also looks at incarceration. It funds the realignment program. And so, I mean, couldn't one argue that Prop 30 is more broad-based? It helps lots of areas of the state in terms of its fiscal crises that many areas are facing versus Prop 38?
There's no question that the governor has used education as his bully pulpit to pass his proposition. And in fact, it's not an education proposition. It is exactly what you said. It is a proposition that will spread money all over the place.
But the money would go to education under Prop 30.
I can't find anything that guarantees money going to education. I see money that goes, there's $3 billion guaranteed to go to the legislature for them to play with. But what it does is it funds a lot of other stuff, and it pays off school debt, which then supposedly will allow them to spend more money.
What we do know is that in the June budget, there were no cuts to education. And well, that's a true statement. I mean, it is a true statement. Now, whether that was a political calculation, I'll put that aside. If Prop 30 doesn't pass, I don't know about 38, but if Prop 30 doesn't pass, what the governor has said is he will be forced to pull the trigger on trigger cuts to the tune of $6 billion to education.
No, the way the propositions are written, he can't do that because there can't be a penalty. The other thing is there's no reason to pull the trigger on education if all of a sudden Paso Robles High School is getting $2 million more if Atascadero High School is getting 1.5.
Under Prop 38.
Under Prop 38, the one that parents are supporting as opposed to the politicians. It's very important that everybody understands that with Prop 38, the money it goes right around Sacramento. It comes down to the local level, local people have input, local people see where it's going. When that money from the other proposition, the governor's proposition, hits the Capitol, we have no idea what's going to happen when it gets in that back room the day before the budget's supposed to be adopted.
Are you concerned, though, that with two initiatives on the ballot that both deal with tax increases, that the voters will get confused, they'll get angry, they won't know which is what, and it's especially confusing, you have Prop 30, and then 8 down you have Prop 38, they're not one after another. Why that happened,
well, we're not going there.
We won't go there, there was some litigation over that, but honestly, the confusion factor could be quite dramatic.
I think there could be confusion. I think if people remember that the higher the number, the better it is for kids, the higher the proposition number, the more money, the higher amount of money will go to kids. So Prop 38 is the one they need to vote for. It can be confusing. It's not going to be confusing because as we continue to poll the public and as we continue to dig down just one question deeper, the public is saying, we want the money to come to our communities.
As we talk today, the Prop 30 is ahead in the polls, whereas Prop 38 is not.
Right.
And so, Prop 38 supporters have some work to do.
Prop 38, when they poll, and when you look at the polls that are being done in the state of California, when you say, well, which would you prefer, this Prop 30 or Prop 38, which in Prop 38, when they ask one question deeper, would you rather have the money going to Sacramento, or would you rather have the money going to Atascadero? They say, oh, we'd rather have the money going to our local community. So as that message grows, I think that's what people are going to vote based on.
What's interesting is the governor is putting a lot of his resources behind it, both emotional, financial, raising a lot of money. We know that Molly Munger is doing the same. I mean, I think she recently committed a lot of, how much was it?
I think it was another 5.5.
Yeah, millions of dollars. So this is going to be quite a battle royale, or will it be? Will they be talking about each other or just talking about their own initiatives?
Well, I think they'll be talking about their own initiatives. That's sort of the handshake arrangement. And while the governor's putting a lot of money into his, the one thing that Molly Munger has, and what Prop 30...
is money.
Well, she does have money.
She has her own money, but...
She has her own money, which the governor and all those guys in the legislature have lots of money. What Prop 38 has is 900,000 PTA people who have the ear of grandparents and teachers and everybody in their communities.
His name is Mark Buchman, a passionate supporter for Prop 38. I'm Brad Pomerance. Thanks for watching California Edition. Welcome back to California Edition. We are now joined by Chris Ungar. He is president of the San Luis Coastal Unified School Board, like Mark Buchman, but Mr. Ungar has done what's called a dual endorsement. He has specifically endorsed both Prop 30, the governor's initiative, and Prop 38, the PTA and Molly Munger's initiative. We'll talk about that in a moment. First, I want to talk about San Luis Coastal as a microcosm, for example, of other school districts around the county and the state. I was speaking with Dr. Crocker about San Luis Coastal and the unique funding mechanism of that district. Most districts are funded through state dollars. San Luis Coastal is known as a basic aid district. Explain how that plays out.
Sure. And the way to think about how taxes and revenues flow into schools is that the property tax revenue that we get actually goes to Sacramento first, and then it is funneled back to our communities. And so back in the 70s, actually, there was a benchmark that was set. And the benchmark talked about how much money per student should flow back to local communities. Well, if you think about it as a bucket, and the lip of the bucket being the amount of money that each school district should get, and that's called the revenue limit. We base it on our average daily attendance. You would hope that you can fill that bucket right to the very top. That's the number of dollars that everybody should be getting. Well, unfortunately, because most tax revenue that comes back doesn't fill that bucket, the state gives us the difference between what we actually get and what we should receive.
But not in San Luis Coastal.
But not in San Luis Coastal, because the law also says that if your local community generates more property tax than the state would be giving back to you, you get to keep the difference between your revenue limit, the top of that bucket, and any additional money that you get.
That's huge.
That is
huge.
It's good.
And as I understand it, and Dr. Crocker talked about this, that has allowed San Luis Coastal, two other districts in this county, many throughout the state, to have less swings in revenue during this recession. Is that fair?
That's fair to say right now, but I would also remind people that it's not stable at all. And
more stable than revenue limit districts?
Well, you know, I know we need to be brief about this, but I'm going to tell you a little story. And the story is that in 2000, when I first was elected to this office, we faced about 10% cut in our property taxes because of a decision that was made in Sacramento that reduced the amount of tax that our major taxpayer, which is PG&E, brought into us. So within a couple of months, we were cutting $5 million out of our budget. We don't consider that we have really a very stable budget at all. In fact, that's why we think it's very important to have healthy reserves, so that if somebody in the state decides they want to cut our revenues, we can at least have a soft landing.
You are facing a deficit.
Oh, yes.
Right now, even though you're a basic aid district.
Correct.
Okay, well, let's shift gears and talk about the two propositions that will be on the ballot this fall. Proposition 30, supported by Governor Brown. Right. Proposition 38, supported by the PTA, funded by someone named Molly Munger. Why have you dual endorsed?
Well, as you know, I'm a director of the California School Boards Association, and I'm the director for this Central Coast region. And the California School Boards Association represents all the school boards in California. And of course, what we look for is what's in the best interest of our students. Well, clearly what's not in the best interest of our students is seeing revenues cut to schools.
No.
Governor Brown has stated that if his proposition doesn't pass, he's going to cut at least $447 per ADA out of every school district in California, including basic aid school districts.
Well, what we know is that if it doesn't pass, he has said he will pull the trigger on what's known as a trigger cut.
Exactly.
And that would result in a $6 billion immediate loss.
Right.
And he's also said that that would result in cutting 15 days in the school year. And for some school districts, for example, your sister district in Paso or San Miguel, they've already been cutting school days. Sure. So it could be devastating.
It absolutely could be devastating. We know that these cuts would just be horrendous. The people think that the school year should be 180 days, and we would actually argue that the school year should be longer than that. in Ed Code, school year is about 175 days. So when we're talking about a 15-day per year cut, we're talking about a school year of 160 days, losing 3 weeks of school on top of the already 5 days that most school districts have lost, going from 180 down to 175. We're talking about almost a month of school going away, 20 days. That's terrible.
But are you concerned that through a dual endorsement that the message isn't clear? Because look, Californians don't pass taxes on themselves very often. Haven't done it since 2004, voted down a cigarette tax in June. We talked about this earlier in the episode. So, I mean, the likelihood that both initiatives would pass seems, I'm just an observer, seems small, and in fact seems like confusion would only be created with having 2 tax increases on the ballot.
Well, I think some people would say, yes, it could be confusing. Our hope is that by endorsing both of them, we're sending a message that school funding is important. And we'd like to see either of them pass. We'd like to see both of them pass. But the important thing is that revenues get raised for schools, or that revenues at least be stabilized so that our districts and our students aren't suffering.
I mentioned to Dr. Crocker that in my estimation, San Luis Obispo County in a lot of ways is a bellwether. It's a fairly moderate county. It tends to vote for winners statewide, be it presidential, be it constitutional offices, be it propositions. In my estimation, if Prop 30, let's say, the governor's initiative passes in San Luis Obispo County, there's a high likelihood it probably is passing throughout the state. And so my question to you, as I did to Dr. Crocker, is what are your people saying to you? What are your voters, what are your constituents saying about the propositions?
You know, they're not saying very much, and I've got to tell you, that kind of worries me. What I'd like to see is people outraged, like they should be, about the cuts in education.
But are they outraged as well? I mean, talk about poor timing. That Sacramento has found $54 million in the Parks Department and maybe $125 million, whatever, in the recycling fund and the Crimes Victims Fund.
And what an unfortunate thing to happen. You know, when you look at it, it looks, I won't say fraud and abuse, but this is the government waste that people talk about. And I would argue that we schools are not wasting money, but I'm afraid that we're being tarred like the rest of them. It's not a good thing to happen, and we really would like people to get out and vote for both propositions. I would prefer.
Right. Now, you are the president of the second largest school board in this county. That is a position of power, and I don't use that pejoratively. If you talk to your constituents to say, I urge you to vote for these propositions, that holds sway. And so I ask you, as I have prior guests, are you going to go out there and affirmatively politic in favor of these initiatives?
Yes.
What does that look like?
Well, I think the first thing we're talking about is that our school board will have on its next agenda a resolution supporting both of the propositions. And then I would like to take that out to the public and present that to the public and say, you need to vote for these things. The other thing that people don't realize, Brad, is we're looking, if Proposition 30 doesn't pass, we're looking at another $3.7, I believe, million in cuts on top of the cuts we're already going to have to make. We've created factual data sheets that show people what that looked like. Now, we can't, as a school district, obviously politic.
Of course.
But we need to let the public know what's going to happen, not only for our school district, but for all the school districts in San Luis Obispo County and throughout the state if these propositions don't pass.
All the school districts, I think there are 10, are they taking similar stance?
I don't know what they're doing. My hope is that they would be. My hope is that all school districts in California would be taking these actions.
Okay, his name is Chris Ungar. He is president of the San Luis Coastal Unified School Board. My name is Brad Pomerance. We thank you so much for watching Charter California Edition.